expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you are.
Welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm John Dickerson. It's an exciting day here in Washington. We finally have that Supreme Court pick we've all been waiting for. The president has tapped Solicitor General Elena Kagan, kicking off her summer nomination drama. CBS News chief legal correspondent Jan Crawford, who called this months ago, is here to break it all down for us. Jan, what's your immediate reaction?
Well, first of all, I also have to say that I called that the University of Alabama would win the national championship as well. So
you're like a Nostradamus.
Telling you what. No, I mean, this was obviously her nomination to lose. From the beginning, she was the leading candidate. She was on the short list last year when President Obama went a different direction and picked Sonia Sotomayor. But when you break it down, Elena Kagan was really the most complete package. She has youth on her side. She's 50 years old. She will serve on that court for a generation. This White House is very impressed with some of her experiences at Harvard Law School, where she brought conservatives onto that faculty, soothed over some real tension and dysfunction that's kind of been typical at that law school. She has a lot of allies on the right, some of whom will testify during her confirmation hearings, yet she's a progressive. So they believe that this will still be a fight, not a death march. They're going to get her confirmed. And they're going to get a liberal to take over the seat of Justice John Paul Stevens, who will serve for at least, they hope, 30 or 40 more years, and also the third woman.
And what does this tell us about Obama in terms of, is he a guy who goes with a safe pick?
No, I mean, this was not the safe pick. Okay. The safe pick was Merrick Garland, who's here in Washington, a federal appeals court judge. Conservatives would have actually been quite pleased if he had been the pick. And if Obama had picked him, that would have meant the president was not willing to expend an iota of political capital on the Supreme Court. Merrick Garland would have actually turned the court to the right. Now, he was interviewed and he was considered a leading candidate, but in selecting Elena Kagan, I think what this shows us about the president is that this is a strategic pick. It's not a political pick. This is not someone he's selected because of ethnicity or racial reasons. She's not going to thrill his liberal base. She's going to be somewhat of a fight with Republicans. But this is a strategic pick for the court because they believe she can go in there, get immediate respect by the justices, build coalitions, and be a very effective voice for the left on that Supreme Court.
What's the reaction been on the right so far to her nomination?
Well, already you're seeing the senators and interest groups come out and start attacking her as kind of being the consummate Washington insider. You know, she's got this elite background, academic background. She went to Princeton, Oxford, Harvard, Harvard Law Dean, University of Chicago Law School professor, you know, worked in the Clinton administrations, now works for President Obama. So they're portraying her as someone who is kind of this classic insider, out of touch with everyday Americans, who has no judicial experience. And of course, that's kind of ironic because Republicans for years have been calling for someone outside the judicial monastery. Now they're saying that that's a negative. They're also pointing as a potential source of contention during her hearings at her opposition to military recruiters coming onto Harvard campus because of its discriminatory don't ask, don't tell policy, which violated some of Harvard's hiring provisions.
So the trick with that ivory tower complaint, the notion that she's not, in one sense that's buying into Obama's argument, because one of the things the president and his staff have been saying is that she understands the sort of regular people, understands ordinary American citizens. There's that debate, which is kind of fuzzy, and then there's this don't ask, don't tell debate. Which of the two do you think, and when we get down to the questioning, is really going to be, you know, or maybe some other third issue, is going to be the real thing we're going to be hearing about?
I think they're all going to pair together, and I think because this is coming on the eve of a midterm election, when you know Republicans are worried about the emerging defeats in some of these states where the Tea Party has really kind of come forward as potentially quite successful candidates, that this is a place that the Republican establishment sees that they can get real traction with their own base, and that the court is an area, if they can paint Elena Kagan as being out of touch, you know, Upper West Side of Manhattan, elitist, is going to interpret the Constitution to be more in your, you know, your backyard, and also, look, she didn't even want the military to come on campus during a war. So you're going to see again the right try to paint her that way. I mean, obviously, as you know well, this is a struggle over the narrative. The White House has rolled this out that, you know, they emphasize realize she's the daughter of, immigrants and public school teachers, and her father was a tenant lawyer, and she clerked for the great liberal icon Thurgood Marshall. She's devoted her life to public service. That's the narrative the White House is putting out, that she understands, because of her background, everyday Americans. You're going to now see Republicans try to claim that narrative and twist it and use it in a different way, that she's just the opposite.
So then
But that happens every time.
Right. And so we have this sort of face-off right now, both sides going. And the next moment, in terms of this narrative, again, we're pretty far away from the actual law and actual policy, but anyway, that's the way these things go, will be the performance aspect of this thing that's become a bit of a charade. What's your guess about how she performs in what is now basically a theater?
Well, remember last year, Justice Sotomayor disappointed Democrats and many on the left because she some ways sounded like John Roberts. She didn't really explain a liberal judicial philosophy in the way that someone like Justice Breyer has done. She didn't really explain why the left has a better view, in their opinion, of interpreting the Constitution. I would expect Elena Kagan to be a little more forthcoming about that and about the way that you should interpret the Constitution from a liberal perspective. I also think she'll be very engaging with the senators. She's very fast on her feet. In her confirmation hearings for Solicitor General, 7 Republicans voted for her, but she had some fascinating and terrific and humorous exchanges with some of those senators talking about her background. So I think she'll be a very agile, on her feet nominee sitting in that hot seat, and give the senators, I think, a real run for their money.
That's great. Thanks so much, Jen.
Okay, thanks.
Now we're going to go to our regular Monday feature with CBS News chief political consultant Marc Ambinder, who's here with his weekly look at what we're supposed to pay attention to in politics. Marc, the big story, of course, coming out of the weekend was Senator Bob Bennett of Utah. What happened?
An incumbent Republican senator was essentially defeated by the organizing prowess of the Tea Party movement in Utah. Robert Bennett, who has served 3 terms in the Senate, who's popular among regular Republican voters of the state, was ousted in this convention process, which allows activists essentially to magnify their own power and can essentially allow a couple hundred people to determine the course of a primary election. And there are 2 Tea Party endorsed candidates who will face off in the June 22nd what most people consider actual primary in Utah. The question now is whether Senator Bennett, who is quite unrepentant in the votes that he took, and let's just remind people, the reason why he drew so much ire is because he supported the TARP bailout. The Club for Growth in Washington really didn't like that and ran lots of ads against him. And then he dared to work with Senator Ron Wyden for a couple of weeks, early on in the health care debate, early on what would have been a bipartisan health care bill.
Right, seen consorting with Democrats.
You can't do that. I mean, it's dead girl, live boy, or Democrats. It really is in the Republican Party at this time. So the question for Bennett now is whether he tries to run on his name, which would mean that he asks voters to write him in on the ballot, which is possible, very, very tough to do. And in all likelihood, Bennett will be the first casualty, real major casualty of all of this anti-Washington, anti-incumbent, anti-party fervor in the Republican Party.
So we've now got the Bennett story, we've got the Chris story in Florida,
yep.
We've got a potential story along these lines happening in Kentucky. So give me your sense. Are we looking at dots that need to be connected? Are they just 3 individual results that are associated with this larger Tea Party movement, but also very local, because everybody's going to want to draw this into a huge national story about the Republican Party?
I think there are a couple of ways to look at it, and I don't think, though, you can entirely isolate this to the Republican Party, because Congressman Jim Matheson also faced a particularly spirited challenge from his left at the convention, the Democratic convention in Utah, and now is going to have to face a state representative on June 22nd as well, who ran against him for his votes on health care. You're seeing, for example, in a district in northern West Virginia, Alan Mollahan has been a long-term member of Congress, is facing a challenge within the Democratic Party from his right. This is tomorrow's election. It's going to be close. You may have Arlen Specter next week defeated by Congressman Joe Sestak from his left. So it's hard
Kendrick
to...
Meek being from the left,
from
I guess,
the left,
in Florida.
Right, in Florida, from a very rich billionaire who got his money by shorting the housing market, shorting subprime mortgages in particular. clearly there are a couple things to isolate. One is anti-Washington sentiment and anti-party sentiment that you're seeing on both sides, whereas the party is out of touch with the average people. And it's also, I think, the ability, though, of groups to organize without the apparatus of the parties, which is a trend you've been seeing since at least 2004 on the Democrats. You're seeing finally this year among Republicans.
Tell me what else, quickly before we go, what else is happening in politics we should be paying attention to?
You know, there's quite a lot going on. Just this morning, the Democratic congressional campaign election threw up its hands and said, no mas. We're essentially no longer putting much, we're no longer essentially contesting Hawaii's 1st congressional district. This is a special election to replace retiring Congressman Neil Abercrombie. This is President Obama's home district, the district where he grew up in, and was born in and grew up in. It's a district the Democrats will probably win back in November, but there are 2 Democrats right now running and 1 Republican, and 2 Democrats are going to split the vote. The White House tried to force one of the Democrats out of the race, didn't work. Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee has already spent $300,000 on this race, but they've said we're not going to spend another penny, which means that the Republican, Charles Zhao, is probably going to win. Republicans finally winning a House special election. Pyrrhic victory because 5 months later Democrats are probably going to retake the seat, but it's going to provide some momentum from Republicans.
One very quick question on the end. Back to the Specter race.
Sure.
Obama's role in it now is we're getting this 1 week. What role is the president going to play?
Well, you know,
in it?
last week I asked the question, is Obama going to campaign for Specter? Because when Specter became a Democrat, there were clearly negotiations behind the scenes about what would happen if Specter were primaried from the left. Would the White House take a risk and campaign for Specter? I was told, yeah, you should expect the president to go campaign for Specter.
Yeah, they wanted to get that.
They wanted to get that. However, as it became clear over the weekend, the race is not only very close. There's a good chance that Congressman Joe Sestak, will beat Arlen Specter. And if you're the White House and you believe there's a chance for either of the 2 candidates to beat the Republican, whose name is Pat Toomey, who's run before in Pennsylvania, which is, I think, a reasonable assumption. You don't want to anger Democrats in Pennsylvania. You have to calculate, well, is it worth perhaps breaking our promise, Senator Specter, if we're going to lose a Senate seat? So as of this morning, the question I asked is it a sure thing that President Obama is going to Pennsylvania? And not so sure.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Mark. We'll see what happens next Monday.
Indeed.
Thanks, all of you, for joining us here this Monday, and thank you for watching Washington Unplugged. Join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm John Dickerson. Have a great day.